The scanner beeped. Not the normal quick approval sound. Not the cheerful green flash that meant you were good to go. This one was different. Sharp. Loud. Wrong. The red light blinked across the boarding gate scanner like a warning alarm, and for a moment the entire line seemed to freeze. Ethan Parker felt the strange drop in his stomach before he even understood why. He stood there holding his phone out to the gate agent, the digital boarding pass glowing on the screen. The line behind him shuffled impatiently, rolling suitcases clicking softly across the polished airport floor. Overhead, an announcement crackled through the speakers about a delayed flight somewhere else in the terminal. Everything felt normal. Except for that red light. The gate agent frowned slightly and leaned closer to the scanner. 1 second, sir. Ethan blinked. That wasn't what he expected to hear. He had checked in the night before. His seat was confirmed. This flight mattered. Missing it would throw off his entire schedule. Before he could say anything, a voice cut through the air behind him. Loud. Sharp. Confident. Excuse me. That's my seat. The words snapped through the boarding area like a glass breaking. Ethan turned slowly. Standing beside him was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a luxury magazine advertisement. Her dark sunglasses rested on top of perfectly styled hair. She wore a sleek black dress and expensive heels that clicked confidently against the tile floor. Her oversized designer handbag hung from her shoulder like it weighed nothing. But it wasn't her outfit that caught Ethan's attention. It was the attitude. She stood there like the entire airport existed for her convenience. The woman raised a paper boarding pass in the air like evidence in a courtroom. That seat is mine, she said again, louder this time. I already checked in. A few people nearby turned their heads. Airport drama spreads faster than wildfire. Ethan stared at her, confused. I'm sorry, what? She didn't even look at him. Instead, she leaned slightly toward the gate agent, lowering her sunglasses just enough to glare over the top of them. He's trying to board with my seat, she announced, her voice filled with practiced frustration. The gate agent hesitated, clearly caught off guard. The scanner beeped again. Red. Ethan felt heat creeping up the back of his neck. He glanced down at his phone and then back at the screen above the gate. Now boarding, Zone 3. Everything was exactly how it should be. Except for this woman. I think there's been a mistake, Ethan said calmly, lifting his phone slightly. My name's Ethan Parker. Seat 22B. For the first time, the woman looked directly at him. Her expression shifted for a split second. A quick flicker of something calculating. Then the smile appeared. Cold. Confident. And completely fake. No, she said flatly. That's not your seat. A murmur moved through the line behind them. Someone whispered something. Another passenger leaned sideways to see what was happening. Ethan suddenly became aware that dozens of strangers were now watching. Great. Exactly how he wanted to start his morning flight. He tried to keep his voice calm. I checked in last night on the airline app. He tilted the phone toward the agent so she could see the barcode. The woman scoffed loudly. Anyone can show something on a phone. That comment hit harder than Ethan expected. For a second he just stared at her. Was she serious? The gate agent raised a hand gently, trying to calm the growing tension. All right, let's slow down. She turned toward the woman. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass? The woman immediately held out the paper pass like she had been waiting for that moment her entire life. There, she said. Scan it. The agent took the paper and slid it across the scanner. The machine chirped. Then flashed red again. Now more people were watching. Phones slowly appeared in hands. Airports are strange places. 1 minute everyone is ignoring each other, the next minute a full audience forms out of nowhere. That's impossible, the woman snapped. I already checked in. Ethan felt a small knot forming in his chest. The flight was almost full. If something went wrong here, he could lose his seat. He stepped slightly closer to the desk. Look, he said, keeping his tone respectful. Maybe there's just a duplicate booking or something. The woman laughed. Not a friendly laugh. A sharp, mocking one. Or maybe, she said, folding her arms, you're trying to take a seat that isn't yours. The accusation hung in the air like a bad smell. Ethan blinked. Why would I do that? She shrugged casually. People do weird things when flights are full. Behind them, someone groaned impatiently. The boarding line had completely stopped now. The gate agent looked between them, clearly realizing this was turning into something bigger. Sir, she said carefully to Ethan. May I see your ID? Ethan nodded immediately and handed it over. No problem. Fax would fix this. But as he watched the woman beside him, something about her behavior didn't sit right. The way she shifted her weight. The way her fingers tightened around her handbag strap. The way she refused to meet the agent's eyes for too long. This wasn't confusion. This felt different. The gate agent studied Ethan's ID, then glanced at the screen in front of her. Her eyebrows slowly pulled together. Ma'am, she said, turning toward the woman. Could I also see your ID please? For the first time since this started. The woman hesitated. Just for a second. But Ethan noticed. And suddenly he had the strange feeling this situation was about to get a lot more interesting. If you've ever traveled through a busy airport, you already know one thing. Most people are just trying to survive the journey. They want to get through security, find their gate, board the plane, and maybe, just maybe, arrive without losing their luggage, their patience, or their sanity. Drama is the last thing anyone expects. But sometimes, one person decides the rules don't apply to them. And when that happens, a normal boarding process can turn into a full-blown public spectacle in seconds. What started as a simple flight for Ethan Parker quickly turned into something far stranger. Because standing beside him at that gate was a woman who believed, very loudly, that someone else's seat somehow belonged to her. She had the confidence. She had the attitude. And she had a printed boarding pass she waved around like it proved everything. At first, it looked like a simple mix-up. Maybe two tickets got assigned to the same seat. Maybe the airline system made a mistake. It happens. But the longer the conversation continued, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a normal mistake at all. Something about the woman's story didn't add up. Her explanations kept changing. Her confidence was starting to crack. And the airport staff were beginning to notice the same thing Ethan was. Because sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one telling the truth. And when airport security systems start digging deeper, the truth tends to show up very quickly. What nobody at that gate realized yet was that this situation was about to shut down boarding for an entire flight. Dozens of passengers would soon be watching. Airport supervisors would get involved. Security officers would quietly step closer. And the woman who had started this entire argument would soon realize something very important. Airports are one of the worst places in the world to try and run a scam. Especially when cameras, computers, and a crowd of impatient travelers are all watching. But to understand how this whole mess started, we need to go back just a little earlier. Back to when the morning still felt calm. Back to when Ethan Parker thought he was about to have the most normal flight of his life. Only an hour earlier, everything had been calm. The airport had that familiar early morning energy, busy, but predictable. Travelers rolled suitcases across the glossy floors, coffee machines hissed behind crowded cafe counters, and overhead announcements echoed through the massive terminal like background music nobody really listened to anymore. Ethan Parker moved through the crowd with the quiet efficiency of someone who had traveled enough times to understand the routine. Security checkpoint. Shoes off. Laptop out. Quick scan. Then freedom. Nothing unusual had happened. No delays. No stress. Just another normal morning flight. And honestly, Ethan needed a normal trip. He was flying to Denver for a work meeting that had been rescheduled twice already. Missing this flight would mean missing the entire presentation he had spent weeks preparing. His boss had made that painfully clear during their last call. So Ethan had done everything right. Checked in the night before. Picked his seat. Downloaded the boarding pass. Set 2 alarms just in case. The plan was simple: get on the plane, sit in seat 22B, listen to a podcast, and arrive on time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Just another traveler blending into the endless flow of passengers moving through the airport. After clearing security, Ethan stopped at a small coffee stand near gate C-17. The smell of fresh espresso filled the air, mixing with the distant scent of airport food courts and cleaning supplies. He ordered a black coffee and found an empty seat near the windows overlooking the runway. Outside, planes moved slowly across the tarmac under the pale morning sky. Ground crews worked with practiced precision, guiding aircraft and loading luggage like a carefully choreographed routine. Ethan checked his phone. Still plenty of time before boarding. He opened the airline app out of habit. Flight confirmed. Seat 22B. Departure on schedule. Perfect. Satisfied, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and took a sip of his coffee, enjoying the brief moment of quiet before the usual boarding chaos started. Around him, other passengers waited in their own little worlds. A family tried to keep 2 energetic kids entertained with snacks and cartoons on a tablet. A businessman typed rapidly on his laptop, probably finishing emails before the plane took off. A couple sat close together, whispering and laughing about something Ethan couldn't hear. Just another airport morning. Eventually, the boarding announcement came over the speakers. Passengers for Flight 482 to Denver, we will begin boarding shortly. The familiar ripple of movement passed through the waiting area as people started gathering their bags and lining up near the gate. Ethan stood, tossed his empty coffee cup in the trash, and joined the growing line. Everything still felt completely normal. The gate agents chatted quietly behind the desk while the scanner lights blinked steadily, ready for boarding to begin. Passengers checked their phones. A few adjusted backpacks and jackets. Someone behind Ethan complained softly about how early the flight was. Then boarding started. Group by group, passengers stepped forward. Scan. Green light. Beep. Next passenger. Scan. Green light. Beep. Everything moving exactly as it should. Until Ethan reached the scanner. That was when the machine flashed red. And a few seconds later, a very loud stranger suddenly claimed his seat. The woman appeared like she had been waiting for the exact moment to step into the spotlight. Ethan hadn't noticed her earlier in the line, but now she was impossible to ignore. She moved forward with the kind of confidence that made people instinctively step aside. Her heels tapped sharply against the tile floor as if the entire terminal was a stage built for her entrance. She looked perfectly put together. Dark hair styled carefully. Large sunglasses resting on top of her head. A sleek black dress that looked far too formal for a morning flight. And hanging from her shoulder was a massive designer handbag that probably cost more than Ethan's plane ticket. But what really stood out wasn't the outfit. It was the attitude. She carried herself like someone who expected the world to adjust to her schedule. Without even glancing at Ethan, she leaned toward the gate desk and lifted a printed boarding pass into the air. "That seat belongs to me," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the terminal. Several passengers immediately turned their heads. Airport lines are quiet places, until something interesting happens. Ethan blinked, still trying to process what was going on. "I'm sorry," he said. The woman finally looked at him. Her eyes scanned him quickly, head to toe, in the same dismissive way someone might look at a piece of furniture blocking their path. Then she gave a tight, almost amused smile. "You heard me," she said coolly. "That seat is mine." She tapped the paper boarding pass in her hand as if it proved everything. The gate agent glanced between them, clearly realizing she had just stepped into the middle of something messy. Ethan raised his phone slightly. "My boarding pass says seat 22B, he said calmly. But the woman didn't even look at the screen. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, studying him with the patience of someone waiting for a child to stop talking. "Then your phone is wrong," she replied. A quiet murmur spread through the line. Some passengers leaned sideways to see better. Others pretended not to watch while very obviously listening to every word. The woman shifted her weight and rested one hand on the gate counter like she owned it. "I checked in earlier," she continued, her voice dripping with practiced irritation. "So I don't know what kind of trick he's trying to pull, but that seat is already taken." Ethan stared at her. "Why would I try to steal your seat?" She shrugged casually. "People do strange things when flights are full." Someone behind them chuckled softly. Another passenger whispered something to his friend. The tension was slowly building, like pressure inside a shaken soda bottle. The gate agent cleared her throat. "Ma'am, can I take a look at your boarding pass?" The woman handed it over immediately, almost eagerly. "There," she said, lifting her chin. "You'll see I'm right." But as Ethan watched her closely, something about the situation started to feel off. It wasn't just her confidence. It was how she avoided looking at the scanner. How she gripped the strap of her purse a little tighter. How her smile seemed just a little too forced. Like she was performing. And for a brief moment, Ethan had the strange feeling this woman wasn't just mistaken. She was trying very hard to control the story before anyone else had time to question it. Unfortunately for her. Airport systems are very good at asking questions. And this was only the beginning. Boarding had completely stopped. What had started as a normal, smooth line of passengers moving onto the plane was now frozen in place. People shifted their bags, leaned sideways to see better, and whispered quietly to each other while pretending not to stare. Airport drama was unfolding in real time. And everyone knew it. Ethan could feel the eyes on him now. Dozens of strangers silently watching the situation like an unexpected reality show. The gate agent held the woman's printed boarding pass and carefully slid it across the scanner. Beep. The screen flashed red again. A small pause followed. The kind of pause that makes tension grow in the air. The woman's confident smile didn't disappear, but it definitely tightened. "That's strange," the gate agent said softly, glancing down at her computer screen. "It's not strange," the woman replied quickly. "Your machine is clearly malfunctioning." Her voice carried just loud enough for several passengers to hear. Ethan noticed how fast she blamed the system. The gate agent tried again. The paper boarding pass slid across the scanner. Beep. Red. This time the murmurs from the line grew louder. Someone sighed. Another passenger whispered, "This is going to take forever." The woman's patience clearly began to evaporate. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I already told you that seat belongs to me." Ethan lifted his phone again, still trying to keep the situation calm. "Look," he said carefully, "maybe the system accidentally assigned the same seat twice. That happens sometimes." He wasn't accusing anyone. He was just trying to move things along. But the woman reacted like he had insulted her. "Oh please," she scoffed. Her sunglasses slid down slightly as she glared at him. "Don't pretend this is some innocent mistake." Ethan blinked. "I'm not pretending anything." She leaned closer to the desk. "What you're doing is obvious." Her voice dropped into a cold, accusing tone. "You're trying to take my seat." That sentence landed like a rock in water. The whispers around them got louder. A man near the back of the line quietly pulled out his phone, clearly hoping something dramatic would happen next. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, trying to stay patient. "Why would I do that?" he asked. The woman gave a small shrug. "People get desperate when flights are full." Ethan felt irritation rising in his chest now. Not because of the seat. Because of the accusation. He had done everything right. Checked in early. Followed the rules. And now this stranger was acting like he was the problem. The gate agent raised both hands slightly. "All right," she said calmly. "Let's take a moment here." She looked at Ethan. "Sir, could I please see your ID?" Ethan nodded immediately and handed it over. Of course. Facts would clear this up. Simple verification. Problem solved. The agent compared the ID to the information on her screen, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." Then she turned toward the woman. "Ma'am, may I see your identification as well?" For the first time since this whole argument started. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her expression changed. Just slightly. But Ethan noticed. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the crowd behind them. Then back to the agent. "Why?" she asked. The single word came out sharper than expected. "Just standard verification," the agent replied. The woman let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. "This is unbelievable," she said. Her voice rose another level, clearly meant for the growing audience behind them. "I fly all the time and I've never been treated like this before." But the agent didn't move. She simply waited. The silence stretched for several seconds. Ethan watched carefully. The woman opened her purse slowly. But instead of pulling out an ID, she started rummaging through it like someone searching for something that might not actually be there. Lipstick. Receipts. A compact mirror. Keys. Everything came out except the one thing the agent asked for. And that was the moment Ethan's suspicion turned into certainty. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something was very, very wrong. By now the line behind them had grown restless. What should have been a quick boarding process had turned into a standstill. Passengers shifted from foot to foot, some checking their watches, others whispering impatiently to travel companions. A few people were no longer even pretending not to watch. The entire gate area had turned into an audience. And right in the center of it stood Ethan, and the woman. The woman continued digging through her oversized purse with dramatic frustration, as if the missing ID was somehow the airport's fault. Keys clinked. A makeup brush rolled across the counter. A crumpled receipt floated to the floor unnoticed. But still. No identification. The gate agent waited patiently. "Take your time, ma'am." The woman stopped rummaging for a moment and straightened up, her expression sharpening. "I already told you," she said firmly, "my ID must be in my other bag." The agent blinked. "Your other bag?" "Yes," the woman replied quickly. "The one I checked earlier." That explanation hung awkwardly in the air. Several people in line exchanged looks. Anyone who traveled even a little knew one simple rule. You never check your only ID. The agent kept her voice polite. "Do you have any other form of identification with you?" The woman shook her head immediately. "No. But that shouldn't matter." She tapped the paper boarding pass against the counter again. "This proves I have a seat." The agent glanced down at the scanner. The screen was still glowing red. "Actually," she said gently, "the system is showing a discrepancy." That word clearly irritated the woman. "Then your system is wrong." Her voice was louder now. Sharp. Defensive. A few more phones quietly appeared among the passengers. People love watching someone lose control in public. Ethan stood silently beside the desk, watching the scene unfold. Earlier he had been nervous. Now something else had replaced that feeling. Curiosity. Because the more the woman talked, the less her story made sense. And the more nervous she seemed to become. The gate agent tapped a few keys on her computer. Then she leaned slightly closer to the screen. Her eyebrows pulled together. "Sir," she said to Ethan, "you mentioned you checked in last night using the airline app." "Yes," Ethan replied. "Could I see that confirmation again?" Ethan unlocked his phone and handed it over. The agent studied the screen carefully. The digital boarding pass. The time stamp. The seat assignment. Everything looked perfectly normal. Next to him, the woman gave an exaggerated laugh. "Anyone can fake an email," she said. But the agent didn't respond. Instead, she continued typing quietly. After a moment she looked up at the woman again. "Ma'am," she said, "did you check in online or at one of the airport kiosks?" The woman hesitated. Just long enough for everyone nearby to notice. Then she answered quickly. "I printed it here." "At the kiosks near security?" "Yes." The agent turned slightly toward her computer again. Her fingers tapped across the keyboard. Then she paused. "That's strange," she murmured. "What is?" the woman demanded. The agent looked back up. "Our system shows no kiosk print under your name today." For the first time. The woman's confidence cracked. It was small. Barely visible. But it was there. "That's impossible," she said quickly. "I was standing right there." Her voice had changed now. Less confident. More defensive. The supervisor standing nearby watched the interaction carefully. And Ethan noticed something else too. The people behind them were leaning in closer. Everyone could feel it now. This wasn't a normal boarding issue. This was turning into something much bigger. The supervisor stepped forward slightly and folded his arms. "Until we figure out what's going on," he said calmly, "we'll need to pause boarding." A loud groan rolled through the waiting passengers. The woman's head snapped toward him. "What? That's unacceptable." But the supervisor didn't react. Instead, he calmly signaled to someone across the gate. Ethan followed his gaze. 2 airport security officers had quietly started walking toward them. And suddenly, the woman's confident posture looked a lot less certain. The moment the supervisor signaled toward security, something subtle changed in the atmosphere around the gate. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But everyone felt it. Like the quiet pressure in the air before a thunderstorm. The woman noticed it too. Her posture stiffened slightly. The confident energy she had been projecting for the last several minutes suddenly looked forced, like someone trying to keep control of a situation that was slowly slipping away. She crossed her arms tightly. "This is completely unnecessary," she said, her voice trying to stay calm but losing its earlier authority. "I already showed my boarding pass." The supervisor stood calmly beside the desk, his expression patient but firm. He looked like someone who had handled situations like this many times before. "And we're simply verifying it," he replied evenly. "It won't take long." The problem, Ethan realized, was that time was exactly what the woman hadn't planned for. She had started this confrontation loudly. Confidently. As if the faster she pushed her story, the quicker everyone would just believe it and move on. But now the pace had slowed down. Questions were being asked. Records were being checked. And every extra second seemed to make her more uncomfortable. Behind them, the boarding area had become fully alert. The line of passengers stretched across the gate, people now openly watching the unfolding drama. A father lifted his child slightly so she could see over the crowd. A man in a business suit leaned against his suitcase, clearly in no rush to miss what might happen next. Even the gate agents at the neighboring desk were glancing over. Meanwhile, the woman returned to digging through her purse again, this time with much more frantic energy. Lipstick tubes knocked together. Coins clattered against the counter. She pulled out a compact mirror, snapped it open, then shoved it back inside. "I had my ID earlier," she muttered loudly. "This is ridiculous." The supervisor didn't rush her. "Take your time." Ethan stood quietly beside the counter, his earlier anxiety now replaced with careful observation. The entire situation was starting to make sense. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a ticketing mistake. It was something much simpler. The woman had expected the system to move quickly. Scan the paper. Wave her through. No questions asked. But now the system had slowed down. And slow systems expose problems. Finally the woman stopped searching her purse. She straightened up and sighed dramatically. "I must have left my ID in my other bag," she announced. The supervisor raised an eyebrow slightly. "The one you checked earlier?" "Yes." "Do you have anything else with your name on it?" "No." Her answer came too quickly. The supervisor nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. Next to him, the gate agent continued typing on her keyboard. The small clicking sounds filled the brief silence. Ethan noticed the red scanner light still glowing on the counter. Patient. Waiting. Accusing. The woman shifted her weight again. Her heel tapped nervously against the floor. "You know what?" she said suddenly. "This whole situation is ridiculous. If this is such a problem, just let him board and I'll take the next flight." The sentence sounded reasonable. But something about it immediately caught the supervisor's attention. Ethan noticed it too. That offer didn't make sense. If the seat really belonged to her, why give it up so quickly? The supervisor tilted his head slightly. "That won't be necessary." The woman's smile disappeared. "This situation involves a possible issue with a boarding credential," he continued. "And we need to resolve it before anyone boards." Behind them, a frustrated passenger groaned loudly. "Come on, man." The supervisor ignored the comment. The woman's breathing had become slightly faster now. Ethan noticed her eyes moving. Not toward the gate. But toward the open terminal behind the crowd. Like she was calculating the distance. That was when the two security officers reached the desk. They didn't rush. They didn't speak. They simply stood nearby. Watching. Their presence alone shifted the energy of the entire gate. The woman noticed them immediately. Her jaw tightened. "This is insane," she said quietly. "No one said it wasn't serious," the supervisor replied calmly. Behind the desk, the gate agent suddenly paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly at the screen. "Supervisor," she said. He stepped closer. "What did you find?" She turned the monitor slightly so only the staff could see it. Ethan couldn't read the screen. But he could see the supervisor's expression change. Just a little. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Interesting," he murmured. The woman's voice rose again. "What is it now?" The supervisor turned back toward her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now more focused, "our system is showing 2 entries for the same seat." The crowd leaned in even closer. "Seat 22B, he continued. "One boarding pass was issued last night through the mobile app." Ethan recognized that immediately. That was his. The supervisor continued. "And another version was uploaded this morning." The woman stiffened. "Uploaded?" she repeated. "Yes," the supervisor said. "An image file." The murmurs from the passengers grew louder. Now people weren't just watching. They were listening. The supervisor gestured toward the paper in her hand. "That boarding pass wasn't issued by our system." The woman laughed again. But this time the sound wasn't confident. It sounded brittle. "Well then your system is wrong." The supervisor didn't react. Instead, he asked a very simple question. Did you upload a screenshot of a boarding pass to your account? The woman's silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. And in that short moment, everyone at the gate realized something was very, very wrong. For a moment, no one spoke. The question hung in the air like a spotlight suddenly switched on. Did you upload a screenshot of a boarding pass to your account? The supervisor's voice hadn't been loud. In fact, it was calm, almost gentle. But somehow that made the question feel even heavier. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the supervisor as if trying to decide whether the situation was still salvageable. Behind them, the passengers had grown completely quiet now. Conversation stopped. Suitcases stood forgotten beside their owners. Everyone was waiting. Finally, the woman let out a short laugh. A brittle one. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said. The supervisor nodded slowly, as if he had expected that response. All right. He turned back to the gate agent. Let's take another look. The agent leaned closer to her monitor, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Small windows popped open on the screen as she navigated through the airline system. Next to her, the red scanner light still glowed on the counter like a silent witness. Ethan stood quietly, arms relaxed at his sides, watching everything unfold. Earlier, he had been anxious. Now he was simply curious. Because whatever this woman had tried to do, it clearly wasn't working anymore. The agent spoke again after a few seconds. Supervisor, I'm seeing 2 separate boarding entries. He nodded. Walk me through it. She pointed at the screen. This one here is the original boarding pass generated through the airline app. She tapped the timestamp. 7:42 p.m. last night. Ethan immediately recognized it. That was exactly when he had checked in. The supervisor nodded again. And the second one? The agent clicked another window open. This one was uploaded manually today. She paused slightly before continuing. At 9:03 this morning. A low murmur moved through the watching passengers. The supervisor folded his arms. Uploaded how? Through a document replacement field. The agent pointed again. It bypassed the normal barcode verification because the system flagged it as a replacement boarding pass. The woman suddenly spoke. So what? Her voice was louder again, defensive. Maybe the system glitched. The supervisor looked at her calmly. Maybe. Then he tapped the counter lightly. But we still need to know where the image came from. The woman's eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan. Then away again. That's not my problem, she said. The supervisor's tone remained steady. It becomes your problem when the image belongs to another passenger. The words landed hard. Even the people in the back of the line heard them. Ethan felt the atmosphere shift again. The situation had officially crossed from confusion into something much more serious. The supervisor turned slightly toward Ethan. Sir, may I see your phone again for a moment? Of course. Ethan unlocked it and handed it over. The supervisor compared the barcode on Ethan's digital boarding pass with the one printed on the paper the woman had been holding. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. But the look on his face said plenty. He handed the phone back. Then he turned to the woman again. Ma'am, he said calmly, this printed pass contains the exact same barcode as the digital one on his phone. The woman scoffed. So, the supervisor continued, that barcode was issued only once. He tapped the paper again. And it was issued to him. The woman's fingers tightened around her purse strap. That doesn't prove anything. Behind them, someone whispered, oh wow. Another passenger quietly started recording. The supervisor glanced back at the computer screen. Let's go a step further. The agent nodded and opened another log window. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she read something. Supervisor. Yes. The uploaded image came from an unverified device. What kind of device? Mobile camera. That detail made the situation even clearer. The supervisor turned back toward the woman. His voice was still calm. But it carried a different weight now. Ma'am, did you take a photo of another passenger's boarding pass? The woman's mouth opened. Then closed. Her eyes moved quickly across the gate area. To the passengers watching. To the security officers standing nearby. To the exit hallway behind the crowd. Every possible escape route. Except there wasn't one anymore. I didn't steal anything, she said suddenly. The words came out fast. Too fast. The supervisor tilted his head slightly. No one said the word steal. Another pause. The woman realized her mistake immediately. But it was too late. The crowd reacted instantly. A few people gasped. Someone whispered, "Did she just admit it?" The supervisor remained calm. So where did the photo come from? The woman rubbed her forehead with one hand. Her confident performance was collapsing now. I found it, she muttered. Found it where? The supervisor asked. Another long pause. Then finally. Her voice dropped. There was a phone sitting on the counter earlier. Ethan felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The woman continued quietly. It was unlocked. The supervisor didn't interrupt. The boarding pass was already open on the screen. More whispers rippled through the passengers. So I took a picture of it. The sentence landed like a bomb. For several seconds. The entire gate just stared at her. Because suddenly everything made perfect sense. The screenshot. The uploaded image. The missing ID. The desperate attempt to rush through boarding before anyone noticed. She hadn't bought that seat. She had simply stolen the information from someone else's phone and hoped no one would question it. And unfortunately for her. Airports ask a lot of questions. The moment the woman admitted where the image came from, the entire atmosphere at the gate shifted. Before, the crowd had been curious. Now they were stunned. A ripple of whispers spread through the waiting passengers like wind through tall grass. Did she really just say that? She took a photo of someone else's pass. Seriously? People who had been quietly watching were now openly staring. Even travelers who had been sitting far from the boarding line slowly stood up, trying to get a better look at what was happening. Airports are busy places. But when something unusual happens, word spreads fast. The woman clearly realized that too. Her earlier confidence was gone now. Completely gone. Her shoulders had tightened, and the calm, polished smile she had been wearing earlier had vanished. In its place was something brittle and defensive. This is being blown way out of proportion, she said quickly. Her voice had changed. It was louder again, but this time it carried a trace of panic. I didn't hurt anyone. The supervisor didn't raise his voice. He didn't react emotionally. He simply looked at her with the calm patience of someone who had heard every excuse imaginable. You attempted to board a commercial aircraft using another passenger's credential, he said. The sentence sounded almost like a legal statement. Because in many ways, it was. That affects airport security. Those 3 words carried weight. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Someone near the back of the line quietly said, "Oh wow, she's in real trouble." The woman's face paled slightly. That's not what I meant to do, she said quickly. I just needed to get on the flight. The supervisor nodded slowly. And how exactly did you expect that to work? She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward Ethan again. For a moment their eyes met. The look she gave him wasn't angry anymore. It was something closer to frustration, mixed with embarrassment. Like someone who had expected to win an argument and suddenly realized the entire room was against them. Ethan didn't say anything. He simply stood there. Calm. Quiet. Letting the truth speak for itself. The supervisor turned slightly toward the gate agent. Please make a note of everything we've confirmed. The agent nodded immediately and began typing again. The clicking of the keyboard sounded unusually loud in the quiet terminal. The woman noticed the two security officers standing just a few feet away. They still hadn't spoken. They hadn't touched her. But their presence alone was enough. Wait, she said suddenly. This doesn't have to be a big situation. The supervisor raised an eyebrow slightly. Oh. Yes, she continued quickly. I can just leave. I'll take another flight. She gestured toward the exit hallway. I'll go talk to the ticket counter. The offer might have sounded reasonable a few minutes ago. But now it only made things worse. The supervisor shook his head gently. That's not how this works. The woman's eyes widened. What do you mean? He gestured lightly toward the paper boarding pass still sitting on the counter. You knowingly attempted to use a credential that did not belong to you. The words were precise. Careful. Official. That requires documentation. The woman's breathing became shallow. You're making this sound like a crime. One of the security officers finally spoke. His voice was calm. It is. The word landed like a hammer. A few passengers gasped quietly. The woman looked from the officer, to the supervisor, to the crowd. For the first time since the entire situation started. She looked completely unsure of what to do next. I didn't think it was a big deal, she muttered. You didn't think airport security was a big deal, the supervisor asked. She didn't answer. Because there really wasn't a good answer. Behind her, the passengers had formed a wide circle around the scene now. Not intentionally, just naturally, as people moved to get a better view. Phones were definitely recording now. Whispers moved through the crowd like commentary. This is wild. Who steals a boarding pass? She thought nobody would check. Ethan noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly now. Her earlier performance had collapsed completely. She wasn't in control of the story anymore. And everyone knew it. The supervisor stepped slightly aside and nodded toward the two officers. Gentlemen. They stepped forward calmly. Not aggressively. Just professionally. Ma'am, one officer said politely. We're going to need you to come with us. The woman looked around the gate one last time. At the passengers watching. At the staff behind the desk. At Ethan standing quietly beside the scanner. Then she let out a long breath. Her voice was smaller now. This is embarrassing. The officer gave a small nod. I imagine it is. And with that, the situation was about to move from public confrontation to something much more serious. For a brief moment, it looked like the situation might finally be over. The security officers stood beside the woman, waiting for her to follow them away from the gate. The supervisor remained calm, hands loosely folded, while the gate agent continued documenting everything in the system. Most people in the crowd assumed she would simply leave. Embarrassed. Quiet. Defeated. But that's not what happened. Instead, the woman suddenly straightened her posture again. It was almost like watching someone flip a switch. Her shoulders rolled back. Her chin lifted. And the defensive panic that had filled her voice moments earlier suddenly transformed into something else. Anger. Oh, this is unbelievable, she snapped. Her voice rose loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. So now I'm the criminal here. The passengers who had begun relaxing immediately turned their attention back toward the scene. The woman pointed directly at Ethan. This whole thing started because of him. Ethan blinked. He hadn't spoken in several minutes. But somehow he had just become the villain again. The supervisor didn't react. But the woman wasn't finished. "You're all just taking his side without asking the real questions," she continued, her voice growing louder. "How do you even know that boarding pass belongs to him?" Several passengers exchanged looks. That argument sounded weaker now than it would have 10 minutes earlier. But the woman pushed forward anyway. "He could have left his phone out on purpose," she said. "Maybe this was some kind of trap." Someone in the crowd actually laughed. The theory was so ridiculous that it broke the tension for a second. The woman glared toward the sound. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. The supervisor raised one hand calmly. "Ma'am." But she kept going. "I bought a ticket for this flight," she insisted. "I have every right to board that plane." Her finger stabbed toward Ethan again. "And now you're all treating me like some kind of thief because he says that seat is his." The supervisor finally stepped forward. His voice remained completely steady. "No one is relying on what he said." He gestured toward the computer screen behind the desk. "We're relying on what the system confirmed." The woman scoffed loudly. "Oh please." She crossed her arms again, shaking her head in disbelief. "Your system already messed up once." "It didn't," the supervisor replied. She ignored him. "And let's talk about something else," she continued. "If he already had the boarding pass, how did I get the screenshot?" That question hung in the air. For a moment the crowd went quiet again. The woman's eyes moved around the gate as if she had just made an incredibly clever point. "Exactly," she said. "Maybe he sent it to someone." The security officer beside her sighed quietly. "Ma'am." But she raised her voice again. "Maybe he's working with someone." Now the crowd definitely reacted. A few people groaned. Someone whispered, "This lady is digging herself deeper." Ethan remained calm. He had already realized something important. The more she talked, the worse things became for her. The supervisor turned slightly toward Ethan. "Sir," he asked calmly, "did you share your boarding pass with anyone today?" "No," Ethan replied simply. The supervisor nodded. Then he turned back to the gate agent. "Can we confirm where the screenshot was uploaded from?" The agent tapped a few keys. Another window opened on the screen. She studied it carefully. "Yes. And?" She pointed to the display. "It was uploaded from a device connected to the airport public Wi-Fi." The woman quickly jumped in. "That proves nothing." But the agent continued. "And the upload location shows it happened inside Terminal C." That detail alone wasn't surprising. But then the agent added something else. "Specifically near the charging station outside this gate." The crowd reacted instantly. Because everyone at that gate knew exactly where that was. It was the small table with charging ports where passengers often left their phones while grabbing coffee or snacks. The supervisor looked back at the woman. "Does that sound familiar?" Her mouth opened. Then closed again. For the first time since she had started shouting. She had nothing to say. The security officer gently gestured toward the hallway. "Ma'am." The woman's anger suddenly drained away again. Her voice dropped to a quiet mutter. "I was just trying to catch my flight." The officer nodded. "I understand." But his tone made it clear something important. Trying to catch a flight and committing fraud at an airport are two very different things. The woman glanced one last time toward the passengers watching. Then toward Ethan. Her expression now carried a mix of frustration, embarrassment, and disbelief. Like she still couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. But by now, everyone else understood perfectly. For a few seconds after the supervisor finished speaking, the entire gate area stayed quiet. Not the normal airport quiet. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone is waiting to see what happens next. The woman stood frozen between the desk and the two security officers, her earlier anger now fading into something much less confident. Her shoulders had dropped slightly. Her purse hung loosely at her side. Even her voice, when she spoke again, sounded smaller. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she muttered. The supervisor looked at her carefully. "Using someone else's boarding pass at an airport is always a big deal." He said it calmly. Not harshly. But the message was clear. Airports take security seriously. Very seriously. The woman looked around the gate area again. Dozens of strangers were still watching. Some shaking their heads. Some whispering. A few still holding their phones up to record. What had started as a quick argument had turned into a full public spectacle. And she was standing in the middle of it. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she said again. The supervisor nodded slowly. "But you did attempt to bypass the boarding process using another passenger's credentials." He gestured lightly toward Ethan. "That affects him, and the security process for this entire flight." The woman pressed her lips together. For the first time since everything started, she didn't try to argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked tired. Embarrassed. Like the weight of the situation had finally settled in. One of the security officers stepped forward slightly. His tone remained polite. "Ma'am, we're going to escort you to the security office so we can finish documenting this." The woman hesitated. "But my ticket." "That will be handled by the airline," the officer replied calmly. She looked down at the printed boarding pass still sitting on the counter. The same piece of paper she had waved around with so much confidence earlier. Now it looked small. Useless. A few passengers near the front of the line exchanged quiet comments. Well, that didn't work out for her. No kidding. I can't believe she thought that would actually work. The woman heard them. Her cheeks flushed slightly. Then she picked up her purse and straightened her dress. If she was going to leave, at least she was going to leave with some dignity. The officer gestured politely toward the hallway. "This way, please." The woman took a step forward. Then another. Her heels clicked against the tile again. But this time the sound didn't carry the same confidence as before. It sounded uneven. Uncertain. As she passed Ethan, she slowed slightly. Their eyes met again for a brief second. Earlier there had been anger there. Then frustration. Now there was something closer to resignation. Like she understood that the entire situation had been her own doing. She didn't say anything. Neither did Ethan. There really wasn't anything left to say. The officers guided her through the small opening in the crowd. Passengers instinctively stepped aside to make room. The whispers followed her as she walked away. Then she disappeared down the hallway with the security officers. And just like that, the drama at gate C-17 was over. The supervisor let out a quiet breath. "Well," he said calmly. "That was unusual." A few passengers laughed softly. The tension in the air finally began to fade. The gate agent turned back to her computer and quickly reset the boarding system. The scanner light changed from red to green. She looked up at Ethan and smiled politely. "Sir, thank you for your patience." Ethan nodded. "No problem." He stepped forward again and raised his phone. The digital boarding pass glowed on the screen. The scanner beeped. This time the sound was clean. Clear. Approved. The green light flashed. Several passengers behind him clapped quietly. Someone joked, "About time." Ethan couldn't help but smile a little as he stepped past the desk and onto the jet bridge. Behind him, boarding resumed. The line of passengers began moving again. Conversations restarted. Suitcases rolled forward. Within minutes, the entire chaotic situation was already turning into a story people would tell later. But for the woman who had tried to board using someone else's pass, the consequences were only just beginning. The moment the woman disappeared down the hallway with the security officers, the entire gate seemed to exhale. The tension that had been hanging over the area for the last 20 minutes finally broke. Passengers began talking all at once. Suitcases rolled forward again. The boarding line slowly came back to life like a paused movie suddenly hitting play. A man near the front shook his head and chuckled. "I've seen some airport drama before," he said to the woman beside him, "but that one was new." She laughed quietly. "Trying to steal someone's boarding pass? That's bold." Behind the counter, the gate agent quickly reset the boarding system. Her fingers moved across the keyboard as the supervisor stood nearby, watching the line reform. The scanner light on the desk switched from red to green. Finally, the supervisor glanced toward Ethan. "Again, sir, thank you for your patience." Ethan nodded politely. "No problem." Although if he was honest, the last half hour had been one of the strangest airport experiences of his life. He stepped forward and lifted his phone again. The barcode glowed clearly on the screen. The gate agent held the scanner toward it. Beep. Green. Clean. Perfect. Exactly how it should have sounded the first time. A few passengers in line behind him clapped lightly, clearly relieved the situation was finally over. One man even called out jokingly, "Justice for seat 22B." A couple people laughed. Ethan couldn't help smiling as he stepped through the gate and into the jet bridge. The loud noise of the terminal slowly faded behind him as he walked down the long enclosed corridor toward the aircraft. For the first time since the argument started, everything felt calm again. His footsteps echoed softly against the metal floor. The plane waited ahead, its open door glowing under the soft cabin lights. A flight attendant stood near the entrance greeting passengers as they boarded. When Ethan stepped inside, she smiled warmly. "Good morning." "Morning," Ethan replied. Then she leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice. "Rough boarding out there?" Ethan laughed quietly. "You could say that." The flight attendant smiled sympathetically. "Well, the rest of the flight should be much more peaceful." He certainly hoped so. Ethan walked down the aisle, passing rows of passengers settling into their seats, lifting bags into overhead bins, and adjusting jackets and headphones. A few people who had witnessed the earlier scene at the gate gave him small nods of recognition as he walked past. Like silent congratulations. He finally reached his row. Seat 22B. Exactly where it had always been. Exactly where it should have been. He slid his backpack under the seat in front of him and sat down, letting out a slow breath as his shoulders finally relaxed. The tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying slowly drained away. A few minutes later, more passengers boarded. The plane filled quickly. Overhead bins slammed shut. Seatbelts clicked. The normal routine of air travel resumed. From his seat by the window, Ethan could see the terminal outside. Ground crew moved efficiently around the aircraft, loading luggage and preparing the plane for departure. Everything looked calm again. But somewhere back inside that terminal, the woman who had caused the entire scene was likely sitting in a security office, explaining her story to airport officials. And that conversation probably wasn't going nearly as smoothly as she had hoped earlier. Ethan leaned back in his seat. For a moment he replayed the entire situation in his head. The red scanner light. The loud accusations. The growing crowd. The moment the truth came out. It was strange how quickly things could spiral from a simple misunderstanding into a full public confrontation. A few rows behind him, two passengers were already talking about it. "Did you see that lady at the gate?" "Oh yeah," the other one replied. "She thought nobody would notice." Ethan smiled slightly to himself. The plane door closed. A soft chime sounded through the cabin. And just like that, the flight was finally ready to leave the drama behind. As the plane slowly pushed back from the gate, the noise of the terminal faded into the distance. The engines hummed quietly beneath the cabin floor while passengers settled into their seats. Overhead bins were closed, seatbelts clicked into place, and the usual calm rhythm of a flight preparing for takeoff filled the air. To anyone else on the plane, it probably felt like a completely normal morning. But for Ethan, the last hour replayed in his mind like a short movie. The red scanner. The raised voices. The crowd gathering. And the moment everything shifted when the truth came out. He leaned back in his seat and let out a slow breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It was strange how quickly a small situation could turn into something much bigger. All he had done was show up for his flight. Yet within minutes, he had been accused of stealing someone else's seat in front of dozens of strangers. And for a brief moment, it had actually looked like people believed her. That was the part that stayed with him the most. Confidence can be powerful. Sometimes the loudest voice in a room sounds the most believable, even when it isn't telling the truth. Ethan glanced out the window. The plane slowly rolled away from the terminal as the runway lights stretched across the morning sky. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and routine, explaining the expected flight time and weather conditions. Everything back to normal. But the lesson from the gate stuck in Ethan's mind. Because the situation could have gone very differently. If the gate agent had rushed the boarding process. If the supervisor hadn't taken the time to check the system. If no one had asked the extra questions. The woman might have actually boarded the plane using someone else's boarding pass. And Ethan would have been the one left behind. That thought made him shake his head slightly. It showed how thin the line can be between chaos and order in places like airports. One quick decision. One extra check. One person choosing to slow things down and verify the facts. That was all it took to stop the entire situation from turning into something worse. Across the aisle, a man was already asleep with headphones on. A few rows ahead, a child was staring excitedly out the window as the plane turned toward the runway. Life inside the cabin had already moved on. But somewhere back inside the airport terminal, things were probably still unfolding. Airport security reports. Airline documentation. A long conversation about why someone thought it was a good idea to take a photo of a stranger's boarding pass and try to use it. Ethan didn't feel angry about it anymore. Mostly he felt relieved. Relieved that the truth had come out. Relieved that the situation had been handled calmly. And maybe even a little grateful that the airport staff had taken the time to do their jobs properly. Because sometimes patience matters more than anything else. When people rush, mistakes happen. But when someone slows down and looks closely, the truth usually finds its way to the surface. Outside the window, the plane lined up with the runway. The engines roared louder as the aircraft began to accelerate. And as the city slowly shrank beneath the clouds, Ethan realized something simple about the entire experience. In the end, entitlement and shortcuts rarely work the way people expect. Sooner or later, reality catches up. As the plane climbed higher through the clouds, the city below slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of white. Inside the cabin, everything had returned to the quiet rhythm of a normal flight. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime, passengers adjusted their seats, and the low hum of the engine settled into the background like steady white noise. The chaos at the gate already felt distant. Like something that had happened hours ago instead of less than 30 minutes earlier. Ethan leaned back in his seat and looked around the cabin. Most people had already moved on. A few passengers scrolled through their phones. Others pulled out headphones or opened books. The man across the aisle was already deep asleep, his head tilted awkwardly against the window. Life had returned to normal. But Ethan couldn't help thinking about how quickly the entire situation had escalated earlier. One loud accusation. One person refusing to back down. One moment where the truth almost got buried under confidence and noise. It was strange how often that happened in real life. Sometimes people assume that if they act confident enough, speak loudly enough, and refuse to admit they're wrong, everyone else will simply believe them. And for a moment, it almost worked. If the boarding line had moved faster. If the gate agent had simply waved her through. If the supervisor hadn't slowed things down and checked the system carefully. Things could have gone very differently. But the truth has a funny way of showing up when people start asking the right questions. And in places like airports, where everything is tracked, logged, and monitored, it usually doesn't stay hidden for long. Ethan looked out the window again. The plane had leveled out now, cruising smoothly above the clouds. Somewhere far behind them, the airport was already preparing for the next wave of flights, the next group of passengers, the next set of unexpected stories waiting to happen. For the woman who had tried to board with someone else's pass, the day probably wasn't going nearly as smoothly. Airport security reports. Airline investigations. And a very long explanation about why she thought stealing a screenshot from someone's phone was a good idea. Actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences arrive quietly. And sometimes they arrive in front of an entire crowd of travelers at gate C-17. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment and smiled slightly. At the end of the day, he had his seat. He was on his flight. And the truth had done exactly what it always does when people give it enough time. It surfaced. But now we're curious about something. If you had been standing in Ethan's place at that gate, what would you have done? Would you have argued louder? Would you have walked away and taken the next flight? Or would you have done exactly what he did and simply stayed calm until the truth came out? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where entitlement finally meets reality, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next wild story.